The 7 laws of public speaking. The first law, presence before performance. There were 2 speakers on the same stage on the same night, addressing the same audience of 400 people in a hotel ballroom in Chicago. The first speaker was, by every measurable standard, the more prepared. He had spent 3 weeks refining his script. He had rehearsed a delivery with a coach. He had a slide deck, clean, professional, built by people who did nothing else for a living. And when the lights came up and he walked to the lectern, he looked the part, shoulders back, suit pressed. He smiled at the audience and they smiled back, because that is what audiences do in the first second before they have decided anything at all. Within 4 minutes, the room was gone. Not physically. 400 people remained in their chairs, but mentally, emotionally, in every way that actually matters, they had left. Phones emerged from pockets. Eyes drifted to the ceiling. A woman in the 3rd row began composing what appeared to be a grocery list in the margin of her program. The speaker kept speaking. His words were fine. His slides were fine. His gestures were rehearsed and landing more or less where they were supposed to. And none of it mattered at all, because the audience had already made a decision about him that no amount of content was going to reverse. And they had made that decision in the first seconds after he opened his mouth, based not on what he said, but on something deeper and more primitive that they could not have named if asked. The second speaker walked out 40 minutes later to the same room, the same 400 people, the same fluorescent ballroom light. She carried no notes. She had no slide deck. She walked to the center of the stage, and she stopped. She stood still for 3 full seconds, which is an eternity in front of a crowd. And she said nothing. She simply looked at the room, not performing the act of looking, not executing the technique of making eye contact. She actually looked at them as if she had just arrived somewhere she had very much wanted to be, and she needed a moment to take it in. And in those 3 seconds, before a single word had been spoken, every person in that room sat up a little straighter. The grocery list went face down. The phones disappeared. The woman in the 3rd row looked up, and she did not look away again for the next 35 minutes. What happened in those 3 seconds is the foundational truth of this entire book, and it is a truth that most speakers never encounter in a lifetime of standing in front of rooms. It is the law that precedes every other law, the condition without which none of the others can fully function. It is this: the most powerful thing a speaker can bring into a room is not a message, not a skill, not a technique. It is presence. And presence is not something you perform. It is something you either inhabit or you don't. The neuroscience of this is both humbling and clarifying. Human beings are, at the most fundamental level of our evolution, threat detection machines. The part of the brain that reads other people, that scans posture, breath rate, microexpressions, vocal tension, the quality of a person's stillness or their movement, is not the thinking brain. It is far older than that. It operates below the level of conscious thought, processing information at a speed the rational mind cannot compete with, and it is rendering verdicts about other people continuously and relentlessly, whether we are aware of it or not. When an audience looks at a speaker in the first seconds, they are not consciously evaluating the speaker's credentials or their content or even their delivery. They are running the same ancient program that their ancestors ran when a stranger walked into firelight. Is this person really here? Do they know where they are? Can they be trusted? The answers to those questions are not found in the script. They are found in the body, the breath, the relationship the speaker has with the space they are standing in and the moment they are standing in it. The first speaker in Chicago had spent 3 weeks preparing his content and approximately no time at all preparing his presence. He walked onto the stage while still in his head, running through the opening, checking his memory for the first transition, managing his anxiety about the microphone, which meant that when his body arrived in front of the audience, the rest of them had not arrived with it. The audience's ancient detection system registered this immediately. A person who is not truly present is broadcasting a specific and unmistakable signal. I am not fully here. And an audience that receives that signal will not wait for you to arrive. They will simply leave. The second speaker had done something that looked, from the outside, like stillness. What it actually was is far more interesting. In those 3 seconds of silence, she was completing the act of arrival. She was bringing herself fully and without remainder into the room, into the moment, into genuine contact with the 400 people in front of her. She was not thinking about her opening. She was not managing her anxiety. She was simply, completely there, present in the way that a great athlete is present in the second before the ball is thrown, or a great surgeon is present a moment before the first incision. It is the opposite of performance. It is the absence of performance. It is the willingness to be exactly where you are, doing exactly what you are doing, without any of the noise that most of us carry everywhere we go. Churchill understood this. Obama understood it. Jobs understood it in a way that was almost theatrical. The long pause before the reveal, the willingness to let silence do work that words could not. What these speakers share across every difference of style and era and context is that they all master the fundamental discipline of arriving before speaking, of becoming still before becoming loud, of giving the room their complete and undistracted attention before asking the room to give its attention to them. This is not a technique you can layer on top of a speech. It is a practice, cultivated over time, built through a genuine and ongoing relationship with the present moment. You cannot fake it, because the audience's nervous system will identify the fake with the same certainty it identifies the real. There is a deeper thing here, and it is the most important thing this chapter will say. Presence is not about you. It is about them. When a speaker arrives fully, when they bring a whole of themselves into genuine contact with the people in front of them, every person in that room feels something that is almost impossible to describe, but instantly recognizable when it happens. They feel seen, not as a crowd, not as an audience, as individual human beings who have been acknowledged, registered, and met by the person at the front of the room. This is what makes a speech of 400 people feel intimate. This is a mechanism by which a speaker in an arena can make a single person in the upper deck feel that the words are being spoken directly and privately to them. It is not a trick. It is not a technique. It is the natural and inevitable result of a speaker who is actually present, actually there, actually looking at the human beings in front of them rather than at the performance they are trying to deliver. You cannot perform your way into presence. Every attempt to manufacture it produces only its imitation, which audiences see through immediately. What you can do, what every great speaker has done before you, is practice your way there. You can learn to recognize the moment before you speak as the most important moment in the entire act of speaking. You can learn to use that moment not to review your notes or manage your nerves, but to complete the journey into the room you are standing in. You can learn to inhabit silence the way the second speaker in Chicago inhabited those 3 seconds, not as a void to be filled, but as an instrument to be played. And when you step forward and open your mouth, the audience will already know, before you have said a single word, that you are someone worth listening to, not because you performed that signal, because you earned it by giving them, first, the whole of yourself, undistracted and fully arrived. The second law, the opening that makes everything else possible, 7 seconds, not 7 minutes, not 7 sentences. 7 seconds is the window an audience gives a speaker before their nervous system renders a verdict that will color everything that follows, a verdict about whether this person is worth their sustained attention, whether the next 20 or 40 or 60 minutes of their finite and irretrievable life is about to be well spent or quietly endured. 7 seconds is roughly the time it takes to draw a slow breath, to speak a single unhurried sentence, to cross 3 steps on a stage. It is almost nothing, and most speakers waste every last fraction of it. They begin with thank yous. Thank you to the organizer. Thank you to the host. Thank you to the sponsors. Thank you for being here on a Tuesday, as if gratitude were an opening move rather than a social reflex, as if the audience came to hear the speaker express appreciation rather than to be transformed by something they did not know they needed. Or they begin with self-introduction. Hi, my name is, I've been in this industry for, I'm here today to talk about sentences that hand the audience permission to decide immediately that they already know what this is going to be. Or they begin with an apology, the most catastrophic opening of all. I know you've had a long day. I'll try to keep this brief. I'm not usually a public speaker, but as if the first act of addressing a room should be the dismantling of every reason the audience might have to trust you. Every one of these openings is a kind of throat clearing, and throat clearing is not a way to begin. It is a way to stall. It is the audible sound of a speaker who has not yet decided to be in the room, buying time they cannot afford with currency they do not have. The brutal mathematics of attention are not negotiable. An audience's focus is not a steady resource that depletes slowly over time. It is a spike, high at the very beginning, when novelty and possibility are at their peak, and almost impossible to fully restore once it begins to fall. The speaker who wastes the opening is not simply delaying a good speech. They are dismantling the conditions under which a good speech can be received at all. They are trading the one moment of maximum neurological openness in the entire event for performance of social pleasantries, and the audience, without knowing why, will never be as available to them again as they were in those first 7 seconds before the speaker chose to squander them. The greatest openings in the history of public speaking share a single architectural principle, and it is this: they do not introduce the speech. They become the speech. Immediately, without transition, without apology, without warm-up, they create a gravitational pull so complete and so sudden that the audience does not choose to pay attention. They simply find themselves paying attention, the way you find yourself leaning forward at the precise moment a storyteller drops their voice, before you have consciously registered that anything has changed. Consider what a great opening actually does in the listener's nervous system. In the first 7 seconds, the audience's brain is performing a rapid and largely unconscious triage. Is this signal worth tracking? The signal that says yes most powerfully is not information. It is not even emotion. It is disruption. The sense that something unexpected is happening, that the pattern is broken, that what comes next cannot be predicted from what came before. The human brain is a prediction machine, and nothing commands its attention more completely than the moment its predictions fail. A great opening fails the audience's prediction. It says, with its very structure, you do not know where this is going, and in that moment of productive disorientation, the audience is completely, helplessly yours. There is a specific kind of opening that does this through a question, not a rhetorical question, not the speaker's equivalent of a preamble dressed in a question mark, but a genuine and unsettling question that the audience cannot immediately answer and cannot stop themselves from trying to. Not, have you ever wondered about the nature of leadership, which is so broad and so expected that it lands like a formality, but something that arrives with particular precision, aimed at a specific nerve? What would you do if you discovered that the single decision you were most proud was built on a false premise? That question does not invite reflection. It demands it. And while the audience is inside that demand, they are inside the speech. There is the opening that works through story. Not the story that warms up the room, but the story that drops the audience directly into the middle of something that is already happening, with no orientation and no introduction. Not, I want to tell you about something that happened to me in 2019, but the moment itself, already in motion. The phone rang at 2 a.m., and I knew before I answered it that everything was about to change. That sentence does not prepare the audience for a story. It puts them inside one. And the inside of a story is the most attentive place a human being can be. Because the human brain does not experience story as content. It experiences story as reality, firing the same neural patterns that fired during actual lived experience, which is why a well-constructed opening story does not feel like listening. It feels like being there. There is the open that arrives as a bold and counterintuitive statement, a claim so unexpected, so contrary to what the audience believe they know, that it triggers a specific kind of cognitive friction that makes attention involuntary. Everything you've been taught about productivity is designed to make you less productive. The most dangerous word in business is consensus. Confidence does not precede success. It follows it, and only sometimes. These are not provocations for their own sake. They are invitations into a room the audience did not know existed. And the invitation is issued at full force, without the speaker flinching. The moment the audience hears a statement that contradicts something they believe, the part of their brain responsible for resolving contradiction activates immediately and powerfully. And the speaker who put them in that state is the only person who can get them out. There is the opening that places the audience inside a scene so vivid and so specific that the room disappears and only the image remains. Not, think about a time when you felt completely alone, but the specific weight of a specific moment, rendered with the precision of a novelist. There is a particular quality of silence in a hospital waiting room at 3 a.m. The lights are too bright and too cold, and everyone sitting in those plastic chairs is doing the same thing. Not waiting for news, but waiting for the world to return to the shape it was in before. That kind of opening does not ask the audience to engage. It reaches into them and engages them directly, through the oldest and most reliable mechanism human beings possess, the ability to inhabit a place through the power of sufficiently vivid description. There is the opening through shared humanity, the moment when a speaker names something true about the experience of being alive in a way so precise and so uncurated that the audience feels, with a sudden and slightly shocking clarity, that they are not alone in something they thought they were alone in. These openings are the hardest to construct and the most powerful when they land, because they work not through surprise or disruption, but through recognition. The deep, resonant, almost physical sensation of being understood by another person before they have even told you what they are going to say. And there is the opening through a startling fact, not a statistic recited like evidence in a legal brief, but a fact delivered with the weight of its full implications, held in the air long enough for the audience to feel what it means. Now, research shows that 65% of employees are disengaged at work, but 2 out of every 3 people sitting in the rooms where your company's most important decisions are made would rather be somewhere else, and they are. The opening of the most watched TED Talk ever delivered, Sir Ken Robinson's 2006 address on creativity and education, begins not with biography, not with a thank you, but with a joke so perfectly constructed that the audience laughs before they have consciously processed why. And in laughing, they lower every defensive barrier they brought into the room. The speech that followed reached hundreds of millions of people and changed the global conversation about childhood learning. And it did all that from a foundation built in the first 30 seconds by a man who understood that an audience that is laughing is an audience that is listening. The opening of Martin Luther King's address at the March on Washington does not begin with, "I have a dream." It begins with 50 years ago. 4 words that instantly, unmistakably activate the architecture of Lincoln's Gettysburg Address in every American ear, placing the speech inside a tradition of moral reckoning before a single original argument has been made. The speech had its audience before it had its famous passage, because the opening had already done something the passage could only deepen. The principle underneath all of these openings is identical, and it is worth sitting with until it becomes instinct rather than knowledge. A great opening does not describe what the speech will do. It does it. It does not announce a theme. It creates an experience. It does not signal what kind of speaker this person is going to be. It demonstrates it immediately, without preparation and without warning. In the first 7 seconds, when the audience is most alive to the possibility that something remarkable might be about to happen, and in the moment that opening lands, in the moment the question strikes its target, the story drops the audience into its scene. The counterintuitive claim lights up the friction in their thinking. The speech is no longer something the audience is attending. It is something the audience is inside. And from inside, they will follow you almost anywhere you choose to go. The first sentence of any speech is the most important sentence in it, not because it establishes a topic or signals a structure or introduces the speaker's thesis, but because it is the one sentence whose power is entirely unearned. The one sentence the audience receives without any relationship, any context, any accumulated trust. It succeeds or fails on its own, naked and alone, in the first seventh of the first minute. And the speaker who understands this, who understands that the opening is not the beginning of the speech, but the condition under which the speech becomes possible, is the speaker who walks to the front of a room and, before they have said a word, is already building something irresistible. The third law: story is not a tool, story is a foundation. For 99% of human history, there were no slides. There were no abstractions rendered in clean sans serif fonts on backlit screens. There were no frameworks, no acronyms, no 3-step models for achieving organizational alignment. There were no structured arguments building from premise to evidence to conclusion in the manner that schools and business schools and debate coaches have taught us to believe is a natural and superior shape of human communication. There was fire. There were the people gathered around it. And there was the person whose words held the group together, who transmitted the knowledge of where the game ran and what the weather meant and why the stranger from the next valley could not be trusted. Not through data or proof or logical progression, but through story. Always through story. For 100,000 years before anyone thought to call it a technique, story was the only technology human beings had for passing the truth from one mind to another. And the minds that received it kept what they heard because those minds were built at the deepest level of their architecture to receive exactly this. This is not sentiment. This is neuroscience. And the neuroscience is unambiguous. When a human brain encounters information presented as data, as statistics, as structured argument, as a sequence of abstract propositions, it activates the language processing regions and does the work of comprehension, and then it largely stops. The information has been received. It has been filed. It will almost certainly be forgotten within 48 hours, because the brain's filing system treats information as a guest rather than a resident, and guests without an emotional address do not stay long. But when a human brain encounters information presented as story, something categorically different happens. The language regions activate, yes, but so does the motor cortex, as though the listener's body is preparing to perform the actions being described. So does the sensory cortex, as though the listener is physically inside the scene. So does the limbic system, the ancient seat of emotion and memory, flooding the experience with the neurochemical markers that the brain uses to flag something as important, as worth keeping, as part of the self. The brain does not process story as information about an experience. It processes story as the experience itself. And what the brain experiences, it remembers. What the brain merely processes, it releases. This is why the speaker who opens with 3 data points and a framework will have given the audience almost nothing to carry home, while the speaker who opens with a single story, 1 scene, 1 character, 1 moment of genuine human consequence, will have given the audience something that lives in them for years. The data points were received by the part of the brain designed to handle language. The story was received by the part of the brain designed to handle life. And the brain does not treat these equally. It never has. Every great speaker who has ever moved an audience to change their mind, their behavior, or their understanding of what is possible has done it primarily through story, not through the quality of their argument, not through the rigor of their evidence, not even through the brilliance of their ideas, which may have been extraordinary, but through the vessel in which those ideas were carried, which was always in the moments that actually changed something, a story. Aristotle knew this. He called it mythos, and he placed it alongside logos and pathos not as decoration for the argument, but as a fundamental and distinct mode of persuasion, a way of establishing not just what is true, but what it feels like to be inside the truth, which is the only form of truth that actually moves people. Lincoln knew it. His greatest speeches are not arguments. They are compressed and devastating narratives about what America has been and what it must become, rendered in language so specific and so human that the abstraction disappears entirely into the particular. Brené Brown walked onto a TED stage in 2010 with a decade of qualitative research on vulnerability and shame, and she gave the most watched TED Talk in history, not by presenting her research, but by telling the story of the moment her research broke her, the specific Saturday morning when she called a therapist from a location she named and said words she quoted and felt something she described with the precision of someone who had been waiting a long time to say out loud. The data was a credential. The story was a speech. The mistake that most speakers make, and it is a mistake rooted in a kind of intellectual insecurity, a belief that story is somehow less serious than argument, less rigorous than data, is treating story as a delivery mechanism for the real content, a spoonful of narrative sugar to help the informational medicine go down. They tell a brief story of the opening to warm a room, and then pivot to the content, as if the story were the porch and the content were the house. They scatter anecdotes through their presentation like garnish on a plate. Pleasant, decorative, and fundamentally beside the point. They say things like, "Let me give you an example," and then tell a story that illustrates the point they have already made, which is a communicational equivalent of explaining a joke. These speakers have understood that story has a function in speaking. They have not understood that story is the function. The distinction is not small. It is the entire difference between a speaker who transfers information and a speaker who changes minds. The story that works in a speech is a specific animal, and it is worth understanding its anatomy with some precision. It is not the 3-act structure of screenwriting, which is built for an audience that has 2 hours in a comfortable seat and a willingness to wait. It is not the hero's journey of mythology, which requires a scope and a sweep that the speaking context rarely permits. It is something smaller and more surgical, built around a single scene, a single moment, a single human being in a specific and concrete circumstance, rendered with enough sensory specificity that the listener's brain can construct the world of the story and begin to inhabit it. The spoken story needs a person the audience can locate in physical space. Not a woman I know, but the specific woman, with a specific detail that makes her real. It needs a moment of change or revelation or consequence, because the brain's story processing apparatus is calibrated specifically for change. It tracks the distance between where a character began and where they end, and it is in that distance that meaning lives. And it needs to arrive at its insight without announcing it, because the insight a listener discovers is infinitely more powerful than the insight a speaker delivers. The story that ends by telling you what it meant has stolen the most valuable thing it could have given you, the experience of meaning it yourself. There's a speech that a venture capitalist gave to a room of startup founders at a conference in San Francisco, and it is instructive not because it was famous, but because of what happened in the room while it was being given. He had come to speak about failure, specifically about the culture of Silicon Valley and its complicated relationship with failure as a signal of ambition rather than inadequacy. He could have presented data on the failure rates of venture-backed startups. He could have constructed an argument about the structural conditions that make failure not just inevitable, but informative. Instead, he told one story. He told the story of driving to his office on a Tuesday morning 8 years earlier to tell a 26-year-old founder, a young woman who had spent 3 years building a company that was about to dissolve, that he would not be writing the check that would save it. He described the drive. He described the specific quality of her composure when he told her how she did not cry, how she asked him 2 questions, and then thanked him and stood up. He described driving home and being unable to explain to his wife why he felt like he had done something wrong when he had done everything right. He never made an argument about failure. He never stated a thesis. But when he finished, every person in that room, people who spent their professional lives making and receiving decisions exactly like the one he had described, sat in a silence that lasted several seconds before the applause began. And the silence was not emptiness. It was the sound of a room full of people discovering, simultaneously, something true about themselves. That is what story does that data cannot. It does not give the audience information. It gives them an experience of information. And from inside that experience, they draw the conclusion themselves, which means they own it in a way they could never own a conclusion that was handed to them. A conclusion you have been given lives in your head. A conclusion you have arrived at through the experience of story lives somewhere closer to your chest, and it behaves differently from that location. It is more durable. It is more motivating. It is more likely to travel from a room where you heard it into the life you go back to when the speech is over. The speaker who understands this changes not just how they use story, but what they think their job is. They are no longer in the business of presenting information. They are in the business of creating experiences through which information becomes understanding, and understanding becomes something a listener can act on. Every idea they need to communicate becomes a question. What is the story that lives inside this idea? What is the human moment, the specific scene, the concrete and particular instance of this abstraction taking place in someone's actual life? Because the abstraction, on its own, arrives at the surface of the audience's thinking and stops there. The story goes all the way in. It finds a place where the audience lives, the place behind the professional exterior and the polite attention, where people actually make their decisions and change their minds and remember things past Tuesday, and it lands there and it stays. For 99% of human history, every person who needed to transmit something true and important to another human being told them a story, not because they lacked a more sophisticated option, but because the human brain is a story processing machine, and every other format of communication is working against the grain of how the mind was built to receive the world. The speaker who knows this does not add stories to their speech. They build their speech from stories up, and everything else, all the data and the argument and the insight and the framework, finds its home inside that structure, the way a river finds its banks and flows. The fourth law: your voice is an instrument, and most speakers never learn to play it. The average person uses approximately 15% of their vocal range in everyday conversation. 15%. The remaining 85%, the depths and heights, the speeds and silences, the tonal colors and dynamic contrasts that the human voice is physiologically capable of producing, sits completely dormant, day after day, conversation after conversation, unused the way a grand piano goes unused when the only person who ever touches it plays the same 3 chords over and over in the same middle register at the same volume. Not because the instrument cannot do more, but because the player never learned that more was possible. And when most of those people stand up in front of an audience to give a speech, they bring that same 15% with them. They bring the voice of their commute and their conference calls and their conversations in corridors. And they point at a room of people who came for something different. And they wonder why the room feels distant, why the words seem to land without weight, why they can see the attention draining from the audience's faces like water from a bath, and cannot identify the mechanism by which it is leaving. The mechanism is the voice. It is almost always the voice. This is not a chapter about projection. It is not about breath support or resonance or the vocal exercises that acting coaches assign in the first week of training. Those things matter, and they matter more than most speakers acknowledge. But they are the plumbing of the instrument, the infrastructure that makes the music possible. What this chapter is about is the music itself, about what the voice can do when a speaker stops treating it as the thing words come out of and starts treating it as the thing that determines what words mean. Because the voice and the word are not equal partners in the construction of meaning. In the competition between them, the voice wins. Every time, always, without exception. There is an experiment that communication researchers have replicated in various forms over several decades, and the results are consistent enough to be treated as a law rather than a finding. Take a single sentence, a simple, neutral sentence, something like, "I didn't say she stole money," and speak it 7 times, each time placing the emphasis on a different word. The sentence that results is not the same sentence spoken 7 ways. It is 7 different sentences, each carrying a distinct and complete meaning, each accusing a different person, or denying a different act, or raising a different implication. The words have not changed. The voice has changed, and the voice is doing the majority of the communicative work. This is the instrument in its most basic function, and most speakers have never consciously engaged with it at this level, never asked themselves before speaking a sentence where the weight belongs, what the architecture of the sentence is, which word is the one that needs the room around it to hear. Pace is the first dimension of the instrument that a speaker must understand, not as a habit to be broken, but as a resource to be deployed. Most nervous speakers speak too fast. Not because they are naturally fast talkers, but because speed is the voice's defense mechanism against the exposure of the pause. The pause is terrifying to the inexperienced speaker because it feels, from the inside, like a failure, like a gap in performance that the audience is filling with judgment. From the outside, it is something completely different. From the outside, the pause is the moment the audience catches up. It is the breath of a speech. The space in which what has just been said settles into comprehension. The beat of silence that tells a listener this particular thought is now complete and worth sitting with before the next one arrives. The speaker who never pauses is the speaker who never lets their audience fully arrive at any of the places a speech is taking them, who keeps moving before the room has finished feeling the last thing, like a tour guide who walks past every painting without stopping, describing canvases the visitors never had time to see. But pace is not simply about slowing down. It is about variation, about the deliberate and conscious modulation of speed as an expressive tool. A story told entirely at one pace is a story drained of drama, because drama lives in the contrast between what is happening quickly and what is happening slowly. The moment before the revelation should move at a different speed than the revelation itself. The part that builds tension should accelerate, almost imperceptibly at first, and then unmistakably, until the listener is leaning forward without knowing they have moved. And then, at the moment of maximum tension, the moment when the arrival of the answer is most urgently needed, the speaker slows, not to a stop, but to the pace of something being handled carefully, something that matters too much to be rushed. The audience feels this change in their body before they register it in their mind. Their breathing changes, their attention sharpens, and the words that arrive in that slowed and weighted moment land with a force that the same words, delivered at the same speed as everything else, could never achieve. Martin Luther King knew this with the precision of a composer. The final minutes of the speech delivered at the March on Washington in August of 1963 are a masterclass in vocal modulation that repays careful study not just as oratory, but as music. The famous passage, the "I Have a Dream" section, which was not in prepared text, but arose in a moment when Mahalia Jackson called out from behind him to tell them about the dream, builds through a series of repetitions that most people remember for their content, and almost no one studies for their rhythm. Each repetition arrives at a slightly different pitch, a slightly different weight, a slightly different internal speed. The spaces between repetitions grow longer as the passage builds, so that by the end, the silences are almost as long as the lines. And those silences are not empty. They are filled with a reverberation of what has just been said, ringing in the air of the Washington Mall and in the chest of the 250,000 people standing in the heat. The voice is doing something in those final minutes that no transcript can capture, because the transcript records the words, and the words are not the speech. The speech is the sound of the words, the pace of the words, the breath between the words, the pitch at which each word arrives and departs. And all of that is a performance on an instrument that King had spent his entire life learning to play. Pitch is a dimension of the voice that carries more authority than any other, and it operates by a rule so consistent that it functions as a biological fact rather than a stylistic preference. When the pitch of the voice drops at the end of a sentence, the sentence carries authority. When the pitch rises at the end of a the sentence carries doubt. This is not a convention. It is a neurological response rooted in how the human auditory system has processed vocal signals throughout the entire history of the species. Falling pitch is a signature of certainty, of completion, of someone who knows what they're talking about. Rising pitch as a signature of a question, of tentativeness, of someone who is not sure they should be saying what they are saying. And yet the majority of speakers, under the pressure of performance anxiety, of wanting to be liked, of speaking in a register of apologetic qualification rather than confident assertion, habitually raise their pitch at the end of declarative sentences, turning statements into questions, turning positions into suggestions, turning authority into its own erosion. The audience hears this. They cannot not hear it. And the speaker who has done the work and knows the material and has something genuinely important to say loses the room's trust, not through anything they have said, but through the shape of the sound in which they said it. Steve Jobs revealed new Apple products in a particular way that became so widely imitated that the word Jobsian entered the vocabulary of presentation coaches everywhere. What most imitators replicated was the cadence, the deliberate, measured pace, the dramatic pause before reveal, the quiet that preceded the announcement. What they failed to replicate was a commitment, the absolute willingness to be silent for as long as the moment required, without filling the silence, without softening it, without apologizing for it. When Jobs held up a device and said nothing for 3 or 4 seconds before naming it, the silence was not a technique for creating drama. It was a demonstration of total comfort with stillness, a speaker so completely at ease inside the moment that the moment expanded to fill the room, and the audience expanded with it. And by the time the words arrived, they arrived into a space that had been prepared to receive them with the maximum possible force. Volume is a dimension that most speakers think they understand, and almost none of them use with real artistry. Louder is not more powerful. Louder is just louder. The speaker who raises their volume to make a point is doing the vocal equivalent of bolding every word in a document. Everything emphasized is nothing emphasized. The most commanding vocal moment in many great speeches is not the loudest moment. It is the quietest, the sudden and unexpected drop in volume that forces a room to lean in, to strain slightly, to come toward the speaker rather than receiving the speech from a comfortable distance. The voice that drops to almost a whisper for a single sentence in the middle of a loud and energetic speech does not lose a room. It deepens a room's attention to a level that the loudest passage could not reach. It says, with its very quietness, that what is being said right now is the most important thing. Too important to be shouted, too valuable to be amplified. It must be earned by those willing to lean in and listen. Churchill turned sentences into anthems. He did it not through vocabulary alone, though his vocabulary was extraordinary, but through the rhythmic architecture of his sentences, which were built with the instinct of a poet for stress and meter, for the placement of the hard consonant and the long vowel, for the weight that accumulates across a series of parallel phrases building toward a climax. The rhythm of the voice is the rhythm of the sentence, and the speaker who understands their prose rhythmically, who can feel before speaking, where the weight falls and where the release comes, is playing the instrument at a level that has almost nothing to do with public speaking technique and almost everything to do with music. The voice is the oldest instrument in human history. Every culture that has ever existed has used it to move people, to bind communities, to transmit what matters most across the distance between one human interior and another. Most speakers who stand in front of rooms have never truly heard their own voice, have never listened to it with the attention they would give to music, have never asked what it is capable of, have never consciously extended their range a single note beyond the familiar 15%. That is not a tragedy. It is an opportunity. Because the 85% is still there, waiting, and the speaker who begins to explore discovers, almost immediately, that the distance between the voice they have been using and the voice they are capable of is not nearly as far as they feared. It is a matter of attention, of practice, of deciding that the instrument deserves to be played rather than simply operated. And the audience, the moment they hear the difference, will feel in exactly the place it was always intended to reach, somewhere beneath language, somewhere older than thought, in the part of themselves that was built before anything else to be moved by a human voice that knows what it is doing. The fifth law, the body speaks before the mouth does, and long after it stops. There was a speaker, a senior director at a financial services firm in London, who gave what was, by every textual measure, a perfect presentation. 12 minutes, thoroughly researched, logically structured, moving from context of problem to solution to call to action with the clean efficiency of someone who had studied the architecture of persuasive argument and understood it well. His language was precise. His data was current. His slides were minimal and professional. He had rehearsed until the content was fluid and the transitions were seamless. And when he stood at the front of the boardroom on the morning of the presentation, he delivered every word exactly as he had prepared it. He said the right things in the right order at roughly the right pace. And when he sat down after 12 minutes, he had lost every person in the room, not at the end, not gradually, but comprehensively and almost immediately in the first 90 seconds. And he did not know it until the questions began, and he realized they were not the questions of people who had been persuaded. They were the careful, non-committal questions of people who were waiting for the meeting to be over. The presentation had failed not in its content, but in its body. While his mouth delivered a message of confidence and authority and competence, his body had been delivering a completely different message for 12 uninterrupted minutes. A message of disconnection, of anxiety managed rather than resolved, of a person who was physically present in a room but not genuinely inhabiting it. His weight had shifted from foot to foot in a slow, continuous rhythm that broadcast discomfort so reliably that the audience registered it as a background frequency beneath everything he said. His hands had remained clasped in front of him at waist height in the posture that communication researchers identify as the most universally recognized signal of self-protection, a literal physical barrier constructed between the speaker and the room. His eyes had moved from slide to person to a point on the back wall in a rotation, so predictable that individual audience members could feel with certainty the moment they were no longer being looked at, which came every 7 or 8 seconds, reliably, like a lighthouse beam that illuminated them briefly and then moved on. These were not catastrophic failures. They were subtle. They were the kind of thing no one in the room could have articulated if asked. But the part of the human brain that reads bodies had read all of it, had processed it, had rendered a verdict about this speaker. Uncertain, protected, not fully here, and had trusted that verdict absolutely and immediately over the carefully constructed argument being delivered in the same room by the same person using the same mouth. This is a law that the body operates by, and it is the most ancient law in this book. When the signals carried by the body and the signals carried by the words are in conflict, the body wins. Not because audiences are cynical or skeptical or looking for reasons to distrust, but because a part of the human brain that processes physical signals, the posture, the movement, the breath, the micro expressions that cross a face in fractions a second, is the amygdala and the associated structures of the limbic system, which have been reading bodies for the entire evolutionary history of the species. This part of the brain was reading bodies before language existed. It was keeping people alive by reading bodies. It processed attention in another person's shoulders as threat assessment, the direction of another person's gaze as information about where danger was located, the pace of another person's breath as a signal about whether the situation was safe or deteriorating. It is incomparably fast, operating below conscious awareness, and it is calibrated to trust physical signals over verbal ones, because physical signals are harder to fabricate, and the stakes of misreading them, for most of our evolutionary history, were terminal. The boardroom is not the savannah, but the brain that sits in every person at the conference table does not fully know this. And so it reads bodies first, and it trusts what it reads. The masterful speaker is always performing 2 speeches simultaneously. There is a speech that comes from the mouth, the words, the argument, the story, the structure, and there's a speech that comes from the body, the movement, the stillness, the gesture, the gaze, the use of space, the relationship between the speaker's physical presence and the room they're standing in. The only way to be truly powerful at the front of a room is to ensure that both speeches are saying exactly the same thing, not similar things, not compatible things. The same thing, with the same conviction, the same authority, the same emotional truth, carrying the same message to the same audience through 2 completely different channels simultaneously, so that the audience's rational mind and the audience's ancient threat detection system receive identical information and agree at every level they're processing that this person be trusted, that this person knows where they are going, that it is safe to follow. Movement is the most misunderstood dimension of the body's speech. The conventional instruction, move around the stage, don't stand in one place, use the space, is not wrong exactly, but it is incomplete in a way that leads most speakers in the wrong direction. The question is never whether to move. The question is why. Movement that exists to burn nervous energy. The pacing, the shifting, the unconscious locomotion of anxiety seeking an outlet does not use the space. It pollutes the space. It tells the audience that the speaker's body is not under the speaker's direction, that something beneath the surface is running the physical performance while the speaker's conscious mind is occupied elsewhere. The audience does not diagnose this. They feel it, as a low-level instability that prevents them from fully relaxing into speech, the same way a slight vibration in an airplane seat prevents a passenger from sleeping even if they cannot identify its source. Movement that is purposeful, that carries meaning, that punctuates ideas, that marks a transition or emphasizes an arrival, is something categorically different. It is the speaker's body enacting the architecture of the speech in physical space. A speaker who moves toward the audience at the moment of greatest intimacy, at the moment when the story becomes most personal, when the truth being shared is most vulnerable, is using their body to close the emotional distance between themselves and the room. A speaker who steps back at the moment of a large and sweeping claim is giving the audience the literal space to take the idea in. A speaker who plants their feet and becomes completely still at the moment of maximum emphasis is using the contrast between movement and stillness the way a musician uses a contrast between sound and silence. The stillness arrives with weight because everything before was in motion, and the audience's attention floods into it the way water floods a vacuum, filling the stillness with the full force of their concentration. Eye contact is the dimension of the body speech that is most often taught as a technique and most often fails as a result. The instruction, make eye contact, hold it for 3 to 5 seconds, move to the next person, is the instruction for how to perform eye contact, and audiences can feel performance immediately. Performed eye contact is the speaker looking at you while actually looking past you, at the idea of you rather than at you, executing the technique of individual acknowledgement rather than genuinely seeing the individual being acknowledged. It is a form of lying, and the body knows a lie before the mind does. Real eye contact is different. It is the speaker actually looking at a person, finding them, seeing them, making genuine contact with them for a moment before moving to someone else. And the difference between the real and the performed version is not subtle. It is the difference between being seen and being scanned. Audiences know which one they are receiving, always, and they respond accordingly. The speaker whose eye contact is genuine creates, across a room of 500 people, the persistent and almost impossible sensation that every person in the room is being spoken to personally and privately, because genuine attention, even briefly given, leaves a trace that the performed version never can. Gesture is a language the hands speak, and like all languages, it has precision and it has noise. The gestures that carry meaning are the ones that emerge organically from the content. Hands that open as an idea opens, that press together as two things are being joined, that push outward as something is being rejected or contained, that rise as the energy of the speech rises and drop as the weight of a moment demands gravity. These gestures are not choreographed. They are allowed, permitted to surface by a speaker who has stopped suppressing the body's natural inclination to illustrate what the mind is doing. Most speakers suppress this inclination aggressively, out of a fear that their hands will betray something, do something embarrassing, call attention to themselves. And so the hands are imprisoned, clasped, pocketed, gripped behind the back, or at least only perform the small nervous gestures of adjustment and self-touch that signal anxiety to every observer. The hands are freed, allowed to move in genuine and natural response to the content. Do not embarrass the speaker. They amplify the speaker, adding a visual dimension to the speech that the audience receives as confirmation that the speaker is fully engaged with what they're saying, that the body and the mind are working together toward the same purpose. There was a woman who coached executives for 20 years and kept, across that time, a simple categorization of the transformation she witnessed. The speakers whose content improved, who tightened their argument or refined their story or clarified their data, almost never changed their impact dramatically. The room received better content in the same body, and the body set the ceiling on how much better content was worth. But the speakers who changed their bodies, who found their stillness, who freed their hands, who learned to look at people rather than at the idea of people, who discovered what it felt like to be fully physically present in a room rather than moving through a performing presence. Those speakers changed their impact in ways that surprised even her. The same content, in a body that was genuinely inhabited, arrived at a completely different address. It went somewhere the previous version could not reach. It passed through the audience's defenses not by arguing its way past them, but by giving the ancient body-reading part of every listener's brain no reason to raise them in the first place. The body speaks before the mouth opens. It has already told the audience something about who this person is, and whether they can be trusted before the first word is in the air, and the body speaks long after the mouth closes. It is the last impression that remains in the room after the words have dissolved, the physical memory of a speaker that audiences carry home without knowing they're carrying it, that surfaces later when they try to remember why that presentation moved them or why this one did not. The speaker who understands this does not think of their body as something that accompanies the speech. They understand that the body is the speech, the primary text, the original document, the signal beneath the signal, and that everything they say with their voices, in the end, commentary on what they're saying with their flesh and their bones, and particular, unrepeatable way they choose to stand in the space that has been given to them. The sixth law: the audience is not your listener. The audience is your partner. There is a misconception so deeply embedded in the way most people think about public speaking that it functions less like a belief and more like a blind spot. Present everywhere, acknowledged nowhere, quietly responsible for more failed presentations and empty speeches, and technically accomplished performances that somehow move no one than any other single error in the entire practice of standing in front of other human beings and opening your mouth. The misconception is this: that public speaking is a transmission, that it flows in one direction, from the speaker who has something to say to the audience that has come to hear it, and that the speaker's job is to deliver the content with sufficient clarity and skill, and the audience's job is to receive it with sufficient attention and goodwill, and that the success or failure of the event is determined primarily by the quality of what the speaker sends rather than by the nature of what passes between them. This model of public speaking is so common that most people have never consciously articulated it, never examined it, never held it up to the light and asked whether it is actually true. It is simply the water they swim in, and it is wrong in a way that changes everything once you see it. Every great speaker who has ever genuinely moved a room has known, with varying degrees of explicitness, a different truth, a truth that feels, when you first encounter it, almost too simple to be the insight it is. An audience is not a passive recipient. An audience is a living, breathing, energetically active entity that is doing something in the room alongside you, not simply receiving something from you. Their attention shapes the atmosphere of the room. Their collective energy, leaning in or pulling back, laughing or sitting silent, restless or rapt, creates the conditions in which your words either land or fail to land. Their unspoken responses are information, continuous and real time, about whether what you're doing is working, whether what you're giving them is what they actually need, whether the connection between you and them is deepening or thinning, and the speaker who treats this information as irrelevant, who delivers their prepared performance to the audience regardless of what the audience is doing, is not giving a speech. They are giving a recording. And recordings, however well produced, do not move people the way a genuine human encounter does. Because a genuine human encounter requires two participants, and a recording only has one. The relationship between a speaker and an audience is not a broadcast. It is a conversation conducted at asymmetrical volume, in which one person speaks aloud, and the other speaks in every other language available to them, in the angle of their bodies, in the quality of their attention, in the laughter that comes early or the laughter that comes late, or the silence where laughter is expected in the particular atmosphere of collective focus that a room generates when it is genuinely with a speaker, and the equally particular atmosphere of polite endurance that a room generates when it is not. These signals are not subtle once you know how to read them, and the speaker who has learned to read them in real time is operating with a form of information that the speaker who is simply executing a prepared text does not have access to. They are navigating by live data, and live data, in the context of human communication, is the most valuable data there is. The art of reading a room begins with understanding what you are actually looking for. It is not the dramatic and obvious signals, the audience member who is visibly asleep, the exodus of people toward the exits, the aggressive questioner who begins their contribution with the words with respect. Those signals have already done their damage by the time they are visible, and they require crisis management rather than skilled adjustment. What the masterful speaker reads is far more granular than this. The micro signals that precede the macro problems by several minutes, the early warnings that the room is beginning to drift before it is fully gone, the shift in collective posture from forward to neutral that happens when a speech has been at the same energy level for too long. The particular quality of silence after a line that was intended to land and didn't, different in texture from the silence after a line that landed perfectly, which is full and resonant, versus the silence of a room that has moved on while the speaker is still talking. The laugh that comes a beat late, suggesting the audience is processing rather than present, working to keep up rather than running comfortably alongside. These are the signals that tell a speaker, with enough lead time to do something about it, that the relationship between them and the room is under stress. What the skilled speaker does with this information is not what most people imagine. It is not a dramatic pivot or a visible adjustment that signals to the audience that the speaker has noticed something is wrong. It is something far more elegant and far harder to achieve, an almost invisible recalibration, a shifting of weight and energy and pace that the audience experiences not as a correction, but as the natural and organic development of the speech, which suddenly, without explanation, is more interesting than it was 30 seconds ago. The pace quickens slightly. A story arrives that wasn't necessarily in the prepared text. A question is posed directly to the room rather than to the abstract air. A moment of genuine humor surfaces. Not a joke that was written for the occasion, but something observed, something true about the specific situation the speaker and audience find themselves in together. And the laughter that responds to it is different from the laughter that responds to a prepared line, because it is the laughter of recognition, of people who feel that the speakers actually hear them rather than in front of them. There was a political speech in the autumn of 2008, a concession speech given late on election night in Phoenix by a man who had just lost the most significant contest of his life. The crowd in the outdoor arena was hostile before he began. Not hostile in the way of opponents, but hostile in the way of people in grief. People who had invested enormously in an outcome that had not arrived. People who were angry and deflated and looking, in a way that crowds sometimes do, for someone to put the weight of their disappointment. The speaker could have delivered the speech as written, executing the prepared concession with dignity and moving on. Instead, in the first minutes, when a wave of booing from the crowd threatened to derail everything, directed not at him but the man who had defeated him, he stopped. He paused for several seconds in a way that was neither defensive nor performative. He waited for genuine quiet, and then he said, quietly and without reproach, that the name of the president-elect would be spoken with respect. The crowd did not love this. There was continued noise. And then the speaker did something that no amount of preparation could have produced. He stayed with it. He did not rush past the discomfort. He absorbed it, acknowledged it, and then redirected it with such genuine and unhurried authority that the crowd, gradually and then completely, followed him somewhere they had not planned to go. By the end, they were applauding not the speech they had come to hear, but the speaker who had been present enough attentive enough, and human enough to meet them where they actually were and walk with them somewhere better. This is what it means to treat the audience as a partner rather than a receiver. It means being willing to deviate from the plan when the room tells you the plan is wrong. It means having enough material, enough genuine knowledge of your subject, enough real relationship with your own ideas that you can navigate without the map when the territory demands it. It means developing the peripheral vision of a great athlete, the capacity to be fully engaged in what you're doing while simultaneously processing the entire environment in which you're doing it, so that your adjustments happen in real time, with the fluid responsiveness of improvisation rather than the mechanical execution of a script. And it means, above all, caring enough about the specific human beings in front of you, not the abstract audience, not the demographic profile, not the role they occupy in the organization that has hired you to speak, but the actual people in this specific room on this specific day, bringing with them all the things that happened to them before they walked in, to let their reality matter to your speech. Hostility is worth particular examination because it is the audience condition that most speakers fear most and handle worst. The hostile audience, the skeptical board, the resistant workforce, the crowd that came loaded with grievances, is typically approached as an obstacle, a problem to be managed or overcome or neutralized. But a hostile audience is not a problem. It is information, and it is among the most valuable information an audience can give you, because it tells you precisely and urgently what the audience needs from you that they have not yet received. Hostility is never really about you. It is about the gap between where the audience is and where you are asking them to go, and the speaker who understands this stops trying to overpower that gap of force and starts trying to understand its dimensions. What do they not trust? What do they need acknowledged before they can move? What has happened to them in this organization, in this industry, in the specific history of the relationship between people like them and people like you that has made them arrive in this room carrying this weight? The speaker who can answer those questions and who can demonstrate early and genuinely that they have tried to answer them does not neutralize the hostility. They transform it into the kind of attention that only people who care deeply enough to be angry can give you, which is very nearly the best attention a room can offer. The transmission model of public speaking puts all of the responsibility on the speaker and none of it on the relationship. It treats the audience as a passive and a one-directional process and measures success by the quality of the delivery rather than the quality of the encounter. The partnership model understands that a speech is not something a speaker does to an audience. It is something a speaker and an audience do together, in real time, with the speaker taking responsibility for the direction and the energy and the forward motion of the shared experience, and the audience contributing through their attention and their responses and their collective presence, the living material from which that experience is actually made. A speech without a genuine audience is a rehearsal. An audience without a genuine speaker is a waiting room. What happens when both are fully present? When the speaker is reading the room and the room is following the speaker, and the energy between them is creating something that neither could have produced alone. It is not a performance. It is a conversation. And conversations, unlike performances, are capable of changing both the people who give them and the people who receive them. That is the difference between speaking at people and speaking with them. And it is the whole difference. And every speaker who has ever truly transformed a room has known, in the moment it happened, which one they were doing. The seventh law, the close that makes everything you said permanent. What a speaker says last is what the audience carries out of the room. Not what the speaker said most eloquently, not what they said most originally, not even what they said most truthfully. In those moments when truth arrived with the force of something that had been waiting a long time to be spoken aloud. What stays, what travels from the room into the car ride home, into the conversation at dinner, into the decision made 3 days later that the person making it could not fully explain but traced, if pressed, back to something they heard someone say somewhere, is the last thing, the closing words, the final impression, the note on which the speech ends, which determines, more than any other single moment, the emotional key in which the entire experience is remembered. Most speakers end badly. This is not a harsh assessment. It is simply an accurate one, and the evidence for it is visible in almost every professional context where human beings stand up and speak to other human beings. They summarize. They recapitulate the 3 points they just made, as if the audience cannot be trusted to have retained the previous 40 minutes without a reminder, as if the speech needed a receipt. They say, "So in conclusion," a phrase that functions as a signal flare to every nervous system in the room that the end is approaching, which causes the audience to begin the process of mentally departing before the speaker has actually finished, so that the final words land in a room that has already started to leave. They thank the audience, which is a social grace and not a crime, but which, placed at the very end of a speech as the last thing said, hands away every ounce of authority accumulated over preceding minutes in a single gesture of grateful subordination. The speaker, in effect, concluding not with a destination but with a curtsy, and some speakers simply stop. They run out of things to say and they recognize the end of their material and they say, "That's all I have," or "I think that covers it," or "Nothing at all," and they sit down and the speech does not end so much as it ceases. The way of fire ceases when the wood runs out rather than ending the way of fire ends when it has done what it was built to do. The difference between ending and stopping is the entire subject of this chapter, and it is a distinction so important that every other law in this book depends on it for its completion. You can walk onto a stage with perfect presence and open with an arresting first sentence and build everything on a foundation of story and play your voice like an instrument and ensure your body and your words are delivering the same message, and read the room with genuine attentiveness and adjust in real time to what the audience needs. And if you stop rather than end, if you simply run out of speech rather than arriving somewhere you intended to go and delivering the audience therewith, intention, you will have wasted the last and most powerful opportunity the speaking experience gives you, because the close is not the end of the speech. It is the speech's final act of purpose. It is a moment when everything that has been built, every story told, every idea planted, every emotional current activated, is gathered into a single point of maximum concentration and driven home with a force that the audience will still feel tomorrow and the day after, and in some cases for the rest of their lives. The architecture of a great close begins further back than most speakers realize. It begins at the opening. The speech that closes with genuine power is almost always the speech whose ending was, in some structural sense, present at the beginning, whose closing image or line or idea was already in the room when the speech started, planted there quietly, perhaps invisibly, waiting to be returned to the end with the weight of everything that happened in between accumulated behind it. This is what communication scholars call the callback, and its power is so reliable and so deep-rooted in the way human minds process narrative that it functions less like a rhetorical device and more like a fundamental feature of how we understand completion. When the final image of a speech echoes the opening image, when the story that began the speech is resolved in the speech's final moments, or when the question posed in the first sentence is answered in the last, the audience experiences something that has no adequate name in the vocabulary of public speaking, but is immediately and physically recognizable when it happens. The speech feels finished, not stopped, finished, in the way that a piece of music is finished when the final chord resolves the tension that the opening established. The way the return home at the end of the journey gives meaning not just to the arrival, but retroactively to everything that happened along the way. There is a specific emotional destination that every great close delivers its audience to, and the speaker who understands this plans for it with the same intentionality They bring to every other element of the speech, not the destination of information received. That is the minimum, the baseline, the least a speech can accomplish. The destination of a great close is a state, an emotional and motivational condition in which the audience leaves a room different from how they entered it, altered in some specific and intended way, carrying something they did not carry in. That something might be resolve. It might be clarity, the particular relief of a complexity that has been named and ordered and made navigable. It might be the specific, activated discomfort of a truth that cannot now be unseen, which will drive behavior in a way that mere information never could. It might be grief, held communally, which is one of the most bonding and therefore most motivating emotional states a speaker can create in a room. It might be joy. It might be the deep, quiet, almost physical sensation of having been truly understood by another human being, which is rarer than it should be and more powerful than almost anything else the speaking experience can produce. The speaker who knows which of these destinations they are heading for, who has decided, before they step onto the stage, not just what they want the audience to think, but what they want the audience to feel at the precise moment the speech ends, has a navigational clarity that organizes every choice in the speech and makes the close not something they arrive at accidentally, but something they build toward with the accumulated intention of everything that preceded it. Consider the final minutes of the speech that Nelson Mandela gave upon his release from Victor Verster prison in February of 1990. After 27 years of incarceration, the world was watching. The pressure on those closing words was almost incomprehensibly large. They needed to speak to the people who had suffered alongside him, to the government that had imprisoned him, to the international community that had pressure for his release, and to the future of a country that was at a point of maximum volatility. He did not summarize. He did not thank the crowd. He did not recapitulate his argument. He ended with a vision, not abstract, not rhetorical, but specific and human, and located in a future that the audience could see from where they were standing. And he ended with a commitment that was also an invitation, spoken in a first-person plural that gathered everyone in front of him and everyone watching into a single forward-moving entity. The speech did not stop. It launched. The audience left not with information about what had been said, but with a direction in which to go, which is the highest function a close can perform, and the one that distinguishes the speech, that changes something from the speech, that merely communicates something. The most watched TED Talk in the history of the platform ends not with a summary of the ideas about education and creativity that Sir Ken Robinson had been building for 18 minutes, but with a story, a brief, specific, gently devastating story about a woman named Gillian Lynn who was taken to a doctor as a child because her teachers thought she had a learning disorder, and who could not sit still and could not concentrate, and who was left alone in a room with a radio playing, and who began to move, and whom the doctor, watching through a window with her mother, identified not as disordered but as a dancer. Gillian Lynn became one of the most celebrated choreographers in the world. She created the movement for Cats and the Phantom of the Opera. The story does not argue for Robinson's thesis. It does not restate his conclusion. It gives the audience a human being in whom every idea in the preceding 18 minutes is made flesh, and it ends there in that image so that what the audience carries out of the room is not a proposition about educational philosophy, but a child in a room, moving to music, finally understood. The close creates an image that outlives the argument, and the image is still doing its work years after the argument has been forgotten. The close that earns its permanence is built on a specific understanding of what memory actually keeps. Memory does not keep arguments. It keeps images, emotions, and particular texture of moments in which something shifted, in which the listener moved from one state to another and knew, in the moving, that something had changed. The speaker who closes by restating their argument is asking memory to do what memory does not do. The speaker who closes by creating an image, by landing an emotion, by returning the audience to a story now completed, by speaking a sentence that arrives with the combined weight of everything in the speech behind it. That speaker is giving memory exactly what it needs, something to hold, something that has a shape and a temperature and a location in the body as much as in the mind. There is a sentence that Lincoln spoke in the closing lines of the second inaugural address in March of 1865, with the Civil War not yet ended and the country broken in ways that had not yet been counted. And it contains more concentrated moral force per word than almost any sentence spoken in the history of American public life. With malice toward none, with charity for all. 6 words, 2 parallel phrases, a rhythm so clean and so inevitable that the sentence seems less written than discovered, as if it had always existed somewhere and Lincoln simply found it and placed it at the end of a speech that had earned, through every word that preceded it, the right to speak with that particular authority. The sentence does not summarize the speech. It transcends it. It takes everything that came before it and lifts it to a register where it becomes not a position on a policy question, but a statement about what human beings owe each other, permanent, weightless, and impossible to argue with. It is still being quoted 160 years later by people who have never read the speech it came from, because the close was strong enough to survive the speech, to outlive the context, to travel through time on its own. That is what a great close does. It does not end the speech. It plants something in the mind, in the chest, in the place where conviction lives and decisions are made. That continues to grow after the room is emptied and the chairs have been stacked and the lights have gone dark. The speaker who understands this does not think of the close as the end of their responsibility. They think of it as the beginning of the audience's, the moment when the speech hands something to people who received it and trusts them to carry it forward into the world, into their work, into their relationships, into the accumulation of small and large choices that constitute life. A speaker who knows how to close does not finish. They release something. And the measure of a truly great close is not the applause it receives in a room, which is generous and temporary, but what happens in the silence after the applause fades, in the private interior of every person who was listening, where something was planted that was not there before, taking root in the dark, already beginning to grow.